When someone with an avoidant attachment style develops deep feelings for you, it's almost never because of dramatic declarations, emotional games, or constant intensity. In fact, many of the behaviors people believe will create attraction, chasing relentlessly, demanding reassurance, or trying to force emotional closeness, often have the opposite effect. For an avoidantly attached person, love usually grows in much quieter, less obvious ways. It develops through subtle psychological shifts and repeated experiences that slowly reshape how safe they feel with another person. Unlike someone who quickly falls in love because of chemistry or excitement alone, an avoidantly attached person often falls in love because their nervous system gradually learns that closeness is not as dangerous as it once believed. This is not an overnight transformation. It is the result of countless ordinary moments that quietly challenge long-held emotional expectations. Every consistent interaction becomes a small piece of evidence. You respect their boundaries instead of pushing past them. You communicate honestly instead of playing games. You don't demand constant reassurance, yet you remain emotionally present. At first, these moments may seem insignificant, but to someone who has spent years protecting themselves from emotional dependence, they represent something entirely different. They begin to rewrite an internal story that has been guiding their relationships for years. That internal story often sounds something like this: if I let someone get too close, I'll lose my independence. If I rely on someone emotionally, I'll eventually be disappointed. If I become vulnerable, I'll be rejected, criticized, or controlled. These beliefs usually weren't formed overnight. They developed through early life experiences or repeated relationship patterns that taught emotional self-reliance as a form of protection. Because of this, an avoidant person rarely evaluates a relationship by asking, "Do I feel butterflies?" Instead, their subconscious is often asking a very different question: am I still safe here? Safety, for them, isn't just physical security. It's emotional safety. The confidence that they can express themselves without being judged, take space without being abandoned, and make mistakes without the relationship immediately falling apart. When you remain steady instead of becoming unpredictable, another layer of emotional tension begins to dissolve. Each experience gently challenges the expectation that intimacy inevitably leads to emotional chaos. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The protective habits that once felt automatic become slightly less necessary. They may find themselves sharing a personal story they normally would have kept private. They might ask for your opinion before making an important decision, something they usually handle entirely on their own. They begin including you in future plans without consciously realizing they've started imagining a life that naturally includes your presence. Perhaps the biggest psychological shift is that they stop viewing emotional closeness as a threat to their autonomy. In the past, relationships may have felt like something that required them to give up pieces of themselves. Now, they slowly discover that a healthy relationship doesn't erase their individuality, it supports it. They realize they can remain independent while also being emotionally connected. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, that realization can feel deeply transformative. This process is often so gradual that they may not recognize it themselves. There isn't always a dramatic moment where they suddenly declare, "I'm in love." Instead, they catch themselves thinking about you during ordinary moments. They instinctively want to tell you about something that happened during their day. Your opinion begins to matter more than they expected. Your presence starts feeling less like an interruption to their independence and more like a source of comfort they quietly look forward to. Ironically, this growing attachment can sometimes make them seem more conflicted rather than more expressive. They've carried for years. This is why understanding avoidant attachment requires patience and nuance. Love doesn't usually arrive for them with fireworks or dramatic confessions. It arrives through trust that has been earned, not demanded, through reliability that has been demonstrated, not promised, through a growing sense that another person's presence brings peace instead of pressure. Ultimately, an avoidant falls deeply not because someone overwhelmed them with affection, but because someone consistently proved through actions rather than words that intimacy could be safe. Little by little, interaction by interaction, their emotional world begins to shift. And when that shift becomes strong enough, they often discover that the very closeness they once feared has quietly become the place where they feel most at home. One of the biggest misconceptions is that avoidant individuals fall in love because someone finally breaks through their walls. More often, those walls come down because they gradually stop feeling necessary. The change doesn't happen in a single emotional conversation or after one grand romantic gesture. It happens through dozens of small interactions where they begin to realize that closeness doesn't automatically lead to pressure, criticism, or the loss of their independence. To understand this, it helps to remember that avoidant attachment is largely organized around self-protection. Many avoidant individuals learned early in life that relying on other people could lead to disappointment, emotional overwhelm, or rejection. As adults, they often become highly self-sufficient. They value autonomy, solve problems on their own, and instinctively create emotional distance whenever a relationship begins to feel too intense. This doesn't mean they don't want love. In fact, many deeply desire connection. The conflict is that the closer someone gets, the more their protective instincts can become activated. Emotional intimacy begins to compete with the powerful need to maintain safety and control. That's why someone with an avoidant attachment style may genuinely enjoy spending time with you while simultaneously pulling away as the relationship becomes more meaningful. So what changes? What causes them to fall deeply for someone? Often it's the experience of being accepted without feeling controlled. They notice that you're emotionally available without becoming emotionally demanding. You communicate openly without making every disagreement feel like a crisis. You respect their need for space without disappearing or punishing them for it. Over time, this consistency challenges expectations they may have carried for years. Another quiet shift happens when they realize they don't have to perform to earn your affection. Many avoidant individuals are used to relationships built around expectations, achievements, or emotional pressure. When they encounter someone who values authenticity over perfection, something begins to soften. They discover that they can simply exist in your presence without constantly managing how they're perceived. Trust also grows through predictability. Rather than dramatic emotional highs followed by devastating lows, they begin experiencing something unfamiliar, steady emotional reliability. You say what you mean. Your actions match your words. You don't alternate between overwhelming affection and emotional withdrawal. This consistency may seem ordinary, but for someone accustomed to unstable emotional environments, it can feel profoundly reassuring. Ironically, one of the moments an avoidant person often starts recognizing the depth of their feelings is when they notice your absence, not because you played games or intentionally withdrew, but because your presence had quietly become part of their emotional routine. They find themselves thinking about conversations they had with you, wondering how your day is going, or instinctively wanting to share experiences with you. These thoughts arise naturally rather than through obligation, revealing an attachment they may not have consciously acknowledged before. This realization can be unsettling. Deep feelings introduce vulnerability, and vulnerability is often the very experience they've spent years trying to manage. As a result, their first reaction may not be moving closer. Sometimes it's hesitation. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes they become quieter while internally trying to understand emotions they aren't accustomed to expressing. This is why people are often confused by avoidant behavior. They assume emotional distance always means a lack of caring. In reality, an avoidant person's outward behavior doesn't always reflect the intensity of their internal experience. Some withdraw not because they feel nothing, but because what they're feeling suddenly seems overwhelming or difficult to integrate. That doesn't mean every avoidant individual responds in the same way, nor does it mean someone should tolerate inconsistent or emotionally unavailable behavior indefinitely. Attachment styles help explain patterns, but they do not excuse hurtful actions or replace personal responsibility. Healthy relationships still require communication, accountability, and mutual effort from both people. When an avoidant truly falls in love, the biggest transformation is often invisible at first. They begin allowing another person into parts of their life they normally keep private. They slowly become more willing to share worries instead of handling everything alone. They start considering someone else's needs alongside their own, instead of automatically retreating into independence. These changes usually happen gradually, almost quietly, but they reflect something significant. Their internal definition of safety is expanding to include another person. In the end, what causes an avoidant to fall deeply in love isn't relentless pursuit or emotional intensity. It's the rare experience of discovering that closeness doesn't have to cost them their freedom, vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to rejection, and genuine intimacy can exist alongside respect for individuality. When those quiet psychological shifts take root, love often grows in ways that are far deeper than they ever expected, even if it takes them much longer to recognize it themselves. Avoidant people are wired to respond to things like autonomy, emotional steadiness, and respect for boundaries. When certain patterns start showing up in how someone treats them, it activates their attachment system in a way that feels almost involuntary, even magnetic. What actually makes them fall isn't usually what you say to them, it's how you exist in relation to them. They notice the moment you stop overextending yourself emotionally. They notice when you stop trying to control how things unfold, or when you quit pressuring them to live up to expectations they never agreed to. And psychologically, this creates a strange kind of paradox. Freedom itself becomes the thing that attracts them. Their brain reads a calm, steady, emotionally balanced presence as safety, and that sense of safety somehow sparks desire at the same time. Avoidant people do want connection, they genuinely do, but only on their own terms. When you stop chasing an avoidant, maintain emotional independence, confidence, consistency, and self-respect, and respect their need for space without pressure or punishment, you create a sense of safety and autonomy that reduces their fear of being controlled, allowing their attachment system to engage naturally and making them more likely to think about you, value your stability, and feel genuinely drawn toward the relationship. Both reactions, as common as they are, accomplish the exact opposite of building attachment. They reinforce the avoidant person's fear of pressure and control, which just pushes them to retreat even further. You didn't do either of those things. You gave them room to breathe, space to process whatever they were feeling, and time to regulate themselves, all without attaching guilt or judgment to any of it. You didn't broadcast frustration or anger. You didn't turn their need for distance into a threat against the relationship. Psychologically, that's a big deal. Avoidant people carry a subconscious expectation that closeness always comes bundled with either a loss of freedom or some kind of emotional cost. Most partners reinforce that fear without even realizing it, but you didn't. By giving space without any punishment attached, you offered them a kind of safety they rarely experience anywhere else. They started noticing that your presence could coexist peacefully with their distance, without any underlying tension. You weren't withdrawing your care, you were simply letting them have autonomy while staying calm and consistent yourself. That combination, freedom paired with emotional steadiness, is genuinely magnetic to someone with an avoidant attachment style. It signals stability, security, and freedom. Three things their nervous system craves constantly, but almost never actually gets. Over time, that safety starts rewiring how they experience intimacy altogether. Where closeness used to trigger anxiety or the urge to withdraw, it starts to feel approachable instead. Their attachment system, usually so resistant to pressure, begins activating on its own. They start reaching for connection voluntarily instead of only responding when guilt or force pushes them to. In essence, respecting their space without punishing them for it doesn't just prevent unnecessary conflict, it actively sparks deep attachment. They feel drawn toward you not because you demanded anything, but because your calm, respectful presence let them experience intimacy as something safe for the first time. That rare combination, freedom plus emotional consistency, is one of the most powerful reasons avoidant people end up falling hard for someone. The third thing that pulled them toward you was your ability to stay emotionally regulated, even under pressure. Avoidant people tend to respond very strongly to emotional intensity. When someone expresses anger, panic, frustration, or desperation around them, their nervous system reads it as a threat. In their minds, emotional volatility signals instability, a loss of control, even the risk of being suffocated. Repeated exposure to that kind of intensity trains them over time to pull away and protect themselves through distance. What you did was different. During moments of tension, conflict, or disagreement, you stayed calm. You didn't raise your voice, overreact, or plead for their attention. You didn't let your own emotions steer your words or actions in ways that added pressure to the situation. Instead, you observed, you reflected, and you responded in a measured, grounded way. Psychologically, this matters enormously for an avoidant person because it directly contradicts their subconscious belief that emotions are dangerous or unpredictable. Your calm presence created a genuinely safe space for them. It let them experience connection without feeling overwhelmed by it. Your emotional steadiness acted almost like a mirror, showing them that intimacy could exist without chaos attached to it. They didn't have to defend themselves or retreat. They could lean in instead, engaging at whatever pace felt comfortable to them. Over time, that steady presence sparks real attachment. Their brain starts associating your calm, consistent energy with safety, trust, and comfort. What once felt threatening starts to feel inviting instead. They notice the contrast between your emotional stability and the unpredictable intensity they might have experienced with other people in the past. That contrast draws them closer, not through pressure, but through the quiet pull of trust and ease. By staying regulated yourself, you let them experience closeness without fear attached to it. It's a subtle, almost invisible force, but it pulls them toward you naturally. They begin to value your presence, appreciate your patience, and quietly recognize just how rare it is to find someone who stays steady, no matter how much they themselves pull back. In essence, emotional regulation isn't just something you do for your own well-being, it becomes a powerful psychological trigger for attachment. It teaches an avoidant person that love can actually feel safe, predictable, and deeply satisfying all at once. That's exactly why your calm presence becomes one of the strongest reasons they start falling, quietly, deeply, and willingly. The fourth thing that pulled them toward you was your ability to stop chasing constant reassurance. Avoidant people are highly sensitive to emotional pressure, especially the kind that comes from repeated requests for affirmation or validation. Questions like, "Do you love me?" or "Are we okay?" or even frequent attempts to confirm how they're feeling can unintentionally trigger their fear of being controlled or trapped. Over time, repeatedly seeking that reassurance can actually push them further away because it activates their instinct to protect their own autonomy. You did something rare here. You stopped begging for reassurance altogether. You learned to trust your own feelings without needing constant validation from them. You let your own calm and self-confidence guide your emotional state instead of depending on them to stabilize how secure you felt. Psychologically, that shift is incredibly magnetic to an avoidant person. By removing the pressure, you gave them room to reflect and simply observe your behavior without feeling cornered by it. Those qualities sparked genuine curiosity in them. They started wondering about their own feelings, their own attachment, your calm distance, not because you were pushing them away, but because you'd created an environment where closeness became a choice rather than a requirement. Avoidant people are naturally drawn to people who don't need them in order to feel emotionally okay. When you stopped seeking constant reassurance, you demonstrated that your love and attention were being given freely, not out of fear or desperation. That activates their attachment system in a genuinely positive way, creating both desire and connection. The nervous system of someone avoidant, usually on high alert for emotional demands, actually relaxes in response to consistency without neediness attached. In essence, letting go of reassurance seeking doesn't just protect your own energy, it sparks real attraction and attachment in them. They start feeling drawn in, curious, more emotionally invested than before. Your quiet self-assurance communicates something powerful, that love is available without pressure, and that freedom and connection can coexist. That rare psychological pattern is one of the strongest reasons an avoidant person starts falling, deeply, genuinely, and in a way that lasts. The fifth thing that pulled them toward you was your emotional independence. Avoidant people place an enormous value on autonomy, often above nearly everything else. They tend to be naturally wary of emotional dependence, of neediness, of situations where someone leans on them for validation or stability or happiness. When they sense that kind of dependence forming, their instinct is to pull away, not because they don't care, but because their nervous system reads it as pressure, as a threat to their freedom. What you did differently was powerful. You kept your own emotional world intact. You had your own passions, your own routines, your own sense of self-worth that didn't depend on them. You didn't look to them to fill some emotional gap or stabilize your inner state. Instead, you showed, just through how you lived, that you were whole and resilient entirely on your own. Psychologically, that communicates something profound to an avoidant person. Love that doesn't smother, presence that doesn't demand, connection that doesn't try to control. That independence created a genuine paradox. While avoidant people instinctively avoid anyone who seems to need them too much, they're actually drawn toward people who are self-contained. Your emotional autonomy activated their attachment system precisely because it allowed closeness without pressure attached. They got to experience intimacy voluntarily, not out of guilt or fear or obligation. Your calm, self-sufficient energy became magnetic simply because you were emotionally independent. You also, without ever spelling it out, established clear boundaries. You communicated, without needing words, that your emotional well-being didn't hinge on their approval or attention. That quiet demonstration of self-respect reshaped how they saw you entirely. It created admiration and it created curiosity. They started wanting to connect, not because they were forced to, but because your independence made closeness feel safe, rewarding, and genuinely intriguing. Ultimately, emotional independence is one of the strongest psychological triggers for attachment in someone avoidant. It shows them love can exist freely, without pressure, while still being deeply valued. Their nervous system responds positively to that. Their curiosity grows, their attraction deepens, and attachment builds in a way that feels natural rather than forced. Your independence wasn't a wall keeping them out. It was the bridge that let them fall for you quietly, deeply, and willingly. The sixth and final thing that pulled them toward you was letting them approach on their own terms. Avoidant people place enormous value on autonomy and instinctively resist pressure. When someone pushes them to connect, to share feelings, or to express love before they feel ready, their nervous system reads it as a threat, and that often triggers withdrawal, defensiveness, or complete emotional shutdown. The real key to their attachment is creating a space where they get to initiate closeness voluntarily, without ever being coerced or pressured into it. By letting them come to you, you created exactly that kind of rare environment. You didn't chase, you didn't demand, you didn't force affection out of them, you didn't guilt them or emotionally withdraw when they hesitated hesitated. Instead, you stayed present, confident, and grounded, giving them the freedom to decide for themselves when and how they wanted to engage. Psychologically, that signals safety and respect, two things avoidant people unconsciously crave, but almost never actually experience. When they sense that connection is available without any pressure attached, their attachment system activates naturally. They start noticing you more, thinking about you more, wondering about their own feelings toward you. This kind of voluntary approach increases their emotional investment precisely because it engages their curiosity and desire rather than triggering their fear response. They start leaning in on their own, sending the first message, initiating touch or conversation, showing interest entirely on their own terms. This is genuinely one of the most powerful forms of attraction for someone avoidant because it feels organic and safe rather than engineered. By letting them come to you, you also reinforced your own boundaries and self-respect at the same time. You communicated without saying a word that your love and your presence are stable and free of demands. That creates a paradox all its own. The more freedom they have, the more emotionally drawn in they become. Your calm, steady, patient energy becomes magnetic, encouraging them to choose connection instead of feeling trapped or cornered into it. Ultimately, letting an avoidant person approach you isn't passive at all. It's a genuinely mature, psychologically intentional act that sparks deep attachment. It lets them experience closeness as a choice, not a demand. And when this is combined with the other 5 behaviors, stepping back from the chase, respecting their space, staying emotionally regulated, letting go of reassurance seeking, and holding on to your own independence, it creates a kind of falling in love that's quiet, profound, and built to last. Avoidant people don't fall in love in obvious, dramatic ways. Their attachment tends to be subtle, internal, and often completely misunderstood by the people around them. But when you stop chasing, respect their need for space, stay emotionally steady, let go of constant reassurance, seeking, hold on to your independence, and let them come to you in their own time, something genuinely shifts. Their nervous system starts to relax, their fear of pressure fades, and for maybe the first time, they get to experience closeness as a genuine choice instead of an obligation. Love, for someone avoidant, is rarely loud or dramatic. It's quiet, it's internal, and it's rooted almost entirely in how safe they feel being around you. Each of these 6 behaviors builds exactly that sense of safety. You never forced them, manipulated them, or demanded their attention. You simply embodied calm, respect, and autonomy, and in response, their attachment system switched on naturally, all on its own. That's really the whole truth of it. Avoidant people do crave connection, but only when it feels genuinely safe and voluntary. By giving space, staying grounded, and letting them come to you, you gave them something they rarely get to experience: intimacy without pressure. And that changes not just how they see you, but how they experience love itself going forward. Over time, that builds something genuine, lasting, and profound. The kind of love that never needed chasing or convincing in the first place.